And Your Excellency, Dr. Al Rabeeah, Your Excellency Saifat al-Dubai, and Senator Latorre, really again, I'd just like to add my thanks to the organizers and express my appreciation for the honor it is to share the podium with you. I'm representing the World Food Programme's Executive Director, David Beasley. Unfortunately, he was unable to join this session. But as you all well know, and I think has been noted in the presentation so far, WFP has a very significant role to play in assisting the people in Yemen. So this is a very, very important conversation for us. And indeed, I won't go into detailing how fast and dire the situation is and how quickly it is deteriorating. I think we're all familiar with that. This session is really geared to discuss how we can work together to collectively improve coordination in Yemen, how to put in place the mechanisms to ensure the vulnerable and the suffering people of Yemen are lifted out of their misery. It's our duty as humanitarian organizations, and indeed as the international community as a whole, to ensure that we do all we can and the best job we can to support the people of Yemen. And rest assured, of course, you have the absolute commitment of the World Food Programme in that regard. Indeed, on the 29th of October, at a high-level meeting to enhance the humanitarian response in Yemen that was organized in Riyadh by Dr. Rabeeah and his team, WFP Assistant Executive Director Elizabeth Rasmussen outlined 3 key principles of coordination that we see as an organization absolutely essential to address the situation. These principles relate to partnerships, access, which we've spoken about a little bit already, and funding, of course. I'm going to build on each of these to feed into our discussions and hope and see to what extent we're able to really develop the mechanisms that can make a significant difference to enable and improve our collective response in Yemen. The first of these principles is partnerships. In Yemen, WFP has expanded our partnerships with both national and international NGOs, leading to very significant gains in the scope and the outreach that we have in our operation. Since April 2017, WFP's tripled the tonnage that it is distributed and more than doubled the number of people reached on a monthly basis. We would not have been able to do that without the partnerships that we have forged. We're currently reaching 7 million people each month and have done so since August 2017. That's a significant scaling up of assistance, but it's, as you've heard, in terms of the numbers that have been shared by my podium colleagues, that's still not enough. But understanding the needs and the priorities is key. And in order to ensure that we have the evidence-based assessments of the country, WFP is working with its food security and agricultural cluster partners. That's the group of partners committed to addressing the issues of food security and agriculture, to develop a famine risk monitoring assessment, a comprehensive assessment to really better understand how we can target those most in need in a clear, prioritized, and impartial manner in accordance with humanitarian principles. This type of partnership will result in supporting our planning as an organization, and clearly we have a very significant role to play as the World Food Programme, but also for our partners to ensure that we prioritize and can really meet fully the needs of those most affected by the situation. We recognize that the effectiveness of our assistance needs to be balanced alongside support in other areas. It's not just about addressing the food security needs. So we're working very closely in an integrated response that covers food assistance, nutrition needs, but also associated with agriculture, the livelihood requirements, WASH, and health. Now, donors are funding many of the humanitarian needs, and although, as Dr. Rabeeah has made very clear, we're still well short of the overall funding requirement that was laid out within the humanitarian appeal, 50% or so. But what is also clear is that further and stronger coordination between the humanitarian actors is needed to ensure that we cover funding gaps and we ensure that there is no duplication of assistance. Furthermore, we need to work collectively to look for opportunities as partners to coordinate in areas where there is reduced conflict, where there is real opportunity to support resilience and recovery projects. That is possible in Yemen. And together with the right type of funding, the UN can support community-based rural development interventions to enhance rural resilience. Secondly, an effective coordinated response requires access. And safe access by people in need to appropriate services, safe access to people in need by humanitarian workers, safe access of imports of commercial and humanitarian cargo. The restrictions that are currently imposed on Yemen that were announced on the 5th of November and which was supposed to exempt the entry and exit of humanitarian cargo and personnel is currently placing an additional strain on the Yemeni people, and not only on those millions who already depend in full or in part on humanitarian assistance for their survival, but also the rest of the population who rely on the commercial sector and the markets for food and other necessities. It is a reality. We've calculated that there is less than 3 months until all in-country stocks of cereals are depleted, and the implications of that are clear. We can only predict that more and more Yemeni people will fall into the critical categories requiring life-saving assistance. Of greater concern, we have less than 17 days, by our calculation, until stocks of diesel are depleted in the north. And once these stocks are depleted, life in Yemen will come to a complete standstill. Lack of fuel is already pushing up prices of commodities and other essential goods in markets which most directly affect the poor and the vulnerable. We're already witnessing queues of vehicles stretching over a kilometre as they wait for fuel to fill their cars. We understand how that can impact the provision of essential services if the fuel is not available. So we must coordinate together to understand each other, to ensure that we keep access open in Yemen for both humanitarian and commercial supplies. 70% of imports pass through Hudaida and Salif ports. Aden port, while important and growing in capacity, as has been noted, cannot compensate, by our view, the ports if they remain cut off. Human suffering in Yemen will not be alleviated unless collectively we can agree on these principles of access and apply these principles accordingly. Now, inland access must also be addressed, and I understand that is looking more positive. The humanitarian situation in Yemen continues to be exacerbated by bureaucratic obstructions that limit humanitarian access within the country and shrink the humanitarian space. Collectively, we must be given adequate space to monitor our projects, as our colleague from the Yemeni government indicated, and to ensure that the right people are getting the right assistance. And the vital equipment and visas are provided to the humanitarian experts to ensure that they can perform their job correctly. Unnecessary bureaucratic interference clearly leads to delays in the delivery of vital supplies. The lead times for the delivery of food have been exceeding 4 months over the course of the past year. Even before the announcement on the 5th of November, considerable constraints on the humanitarian air service, which WFP runs for the entire humanitarian community in Yemen, have hampered humanitarian efforts in the country. Since the 5th of November, UNHAS flights have not received coalition clearance, and delays in flight clearances and restrictions directly impact on our humanitarian work. International humanitarian aid workers and Yemeni nationals are working day and night to provide assistance to 20 million Yemenis who need our support. But restricting the movement of humanitarian staff undermine our ability to help and furthermore adds greater levels of insecurity for them. We agree we must find a way to work more systematically with EHOC and for EHOC to work with us. This is a conversation that we are having, and I know that we are making progress, which is good news. We have already developed procedures related to the use of UNHAS and are able to provide assurance that people not connected with humanitarian relief work will not fly with UNHAS without EHOC permission. However, we need to have greater trust and ensure greater flight management to ensure the effectiveness and the efficiency and the security of UN operations. And we're also seeking for clearer procedures when granting for WFP chartered vessels entering Yemeni ports. We're finding that ad hoc denials and restrictions lead to additional demurrage costs for vessels that are waiting for clearance. And that can be up to $12,500 a day. That's money that should be used to feed critically vulnerable, hungry children. So these are kind of key issues that we need to work through. And we very much, again, I want to stress this, appreciate the intervention by Dr. Rabeeah most recently to enable one of our vessels to be fully unloaded, 48,000 metric tons of wheat at Salif port. Terrific. But these are the kind of issues which we know that we need to continue to work through and to have a very close level of understanding, trust, and coordination on. But access needs go beyond, I think, the delivery of humanitarian assistance in many respects if we're really going to support an understanding of how humanitarian assistance can be delivered in a prioritized, impartial, and correct manner. And the United Nations believe that we should ensure access to journalists and the media to Yemen. Advocacy is a critical tool needed to highlight to the world the precarious and the dire humanitarian situation in Yemen. If we're able to bring the media and the attention to Yemen, we would have much greater advocacy platform which can help lead to the additional funding. And this leads me to the third principle that I made reference to, funding. Our experience has shown this year in Nigeria, in South Sudan, shown that when WFP and the work that we do with our other UN agency colleagues and other partners are supported with a generous contributions from donors, have consistent and safe access, we're able to push back the spectre of famine. We've made significant gains in those countries, and thanks, as I've indicated, with extraordinary generosity from our donors. WFP is now reaching a record number of people in Yemen, over 7 million, as I've mentioned, but only half of the 7 million hungry people that we reach are actually receiving a full ration. With the current restrictions, we can only assume that the needs will increase, and commensurately, so will the funding requirements. We cannot continue to rely on the few donors that have been generously supporting us to date. And we call on all donors, including those countries within the region, who have reduced the funding to the United Nations organizations in recent years, to really increase their assistance to match the level of need in Yemen. I'd like to end by echoing the call that we made back in Riyadh, that coordination requires partnership, requires access, requires funding. We understand fully, and think in this room, the immense humanitarian challenges. They have been really very nicely articulated by my colleagues, but which, if they are left unresolved, will affect generations to come and continue to impact peace and stability, not only within the country, but in the region and beyond. If we do not urgently coordinate to ensure the safe passage of commercial and humanitarian vessels to ports discharging life-saving stocks, we will collectively fail the Yemeni people who depend on us. So together we certainly must coordinate and to ensure that we have that unfettered humanitarian access, to ensure that the tragedy unfolding before our eyes is curtailed. Thank you very much.